Hi, I'm Rob Elsner. I've been asked to put together a quick video to talk about Masonry and the occasional accusation that we as Masons are cultists and that Masonry is a cult, which anyone who knows anything about what cults are knows is very, very far from reality. Cults refer to groups who are living with unusually atypical beliefs, and they live in relative isolation from the world. Cults want to cut you off from families. They want to cut you off from communities. Freemasonry is among the most engaged, visible, and active civic organizations in the world. Yes, we are a society with secrets. We're not a secret society, and that's an important difference. We live engaged with the world. We don't ask members to stop being who they are. We want them to help themselves be better at whatever they do, be more engaged. That's a big difference. Second aspect of cults is that they tend to centralize around a particular charismatic leader. Maybe it's unfortunate for us as Masons, we don't have any single charismatic leaders who rule everything, who lend their absolute power and authority and charisma. We do have some wonderfully charismatic leaders, but that's why we elected them. But they're elected, they serve sentences or terms, depending on how you look at the election process, and then they are gone from influence. They don't dictate your beliefs. They don't change everything. They don't demand. And sometimes cults force everyone to believe in such a level that it is a new religion. Masonry is far from this. We want our members to be more engaged in their houses of worship and in their individual religious beliefs. We have certain things that we agree on, but that's part of what we're about, is getting agreement. Sometimes we have to make concessions so that we can all live together. But that's not endorsing other religions, and that's certainly not saying that we are, because Freemasonry is definitely not a religion. Let's go through some of the characteristics of cults. Here's a list of the 4 most important and most agreed upon criteria to be defined as a cult. The authoritarian control, extremist beliefs, isolation from society, and veneration of a single individual. And we'll take each one of these one at a time. First, authoritarian control is absolute. There's a difference between authoritative, having authority, and authoritarian, demanding authority. If someone demands individual loyalty, if someone demands absolute adherence to their way of thinking, of doing, of being, of believing, they're a cult leader. They're trying to be, at least. And that's from my perspective, both as a psychologist and as a theologian. It's from centuries of research by the finest scientists and philosophers, political scientists, law enforcement individuals. We focus on this idea of authoritarianism. If you're not allowed to disagree, if you're not allowed to have thoughts outside, it's an authoritarian group. And Freemasonry is far from that. You are supposed to challenge one another. You're supposed to have better ideas. You're supposed to improve yourselves in whatever way, shape, or form. So this idea of authoritarianism also gets to the very final point of these 4 about adhering to a single authoritarian leader. We'll get there in a moment. So the idea here of extremist beliefs is the second point for us. Very dogmatic, very extreme, outside of the societal norms. Let's look at the United States as an example, just one of many, many fine examples here. If we were extreme, we would not supply the Constitution of the United States which is about 80% based on Anderson's constitutions of Freemasonry. These ideas are far from extreme then. The idea of Masonry is one of the backbones of America. It's one of the backbones of France. It's one of the backbones of the United Kingdom. And it's certainly among the backbones of many South and Central American nations, at least as they were originally founded, by groups of Freemasons. Some of the countries, like Bolivia, named after Simón Bolívar, who was a very famous Freemason, founding nations upon Freemasonic principles. Our beliefs are not extreme. They're about the idea of justice, equality, liberty, freedom, this idea of independence. These are Freemasonic principles. If you look at what Freemasons have done historically, some were considered extreme beliefs at the beginning. We founded ideas and institutions like libraries, public libraries. Before the Masons built public libraries, the first ones in the world, libraries you had to have a subscription to, you had to pay, and they were expensive. And Freemasons said, hey, everyone should have access to education. Everyone should have access to books. So a lot of public schools, public libraries, public open forums for discussion, public art galleries. Those were ideas and innovations that were thought of as extreme at the beginning because they were by Masons. But in our society, we definitely don't think they're extreme, and we don't think that they're bad extreme. Even when they were thought of as extreme, they were extremely good ideas, except to ruling elites who did not like these ideas. We never chastise someone for believing something different than of what we speak. You are not only encouraged to question, you are required at times to question our beliefs, our views. In some of the most important societies, including one called the Royal Society, is a group of individuals started by Freemasons. Almost all of the original members were Freemasons, who wanted a forum to ask about science and philosophy and medicine and the greatest ideas of art and culture, and challenge one another. That is an important part of what we do. So in this idea of questioning beliefs, cults do not want you to question beliefs. Real religion does. Real Freemasonry does. Real democracy does. All of those institutions and organizations always want you to question so that you build up a strength of your own belief, so that you know what you believe, why you believe it, so that progress can be made, justice can be enacted, truth can be served, God can be worshipped. These are the important aspects for us. Now, I've mentioned isolation from society, which is antithetical to what Freemasonry believes and teaches. Engagement in society is what we're about. But if we were a cult, we would be forcing people to isolate themselves from family members, isolate themselves from friends. Freemasonry teaches to become a better man, a better father, a better husband, better friend, better member of your faith community, better citizen. Peaceable citizen is the words we actually use. That's nothing like a hive mind mentality or an echo chamber or an isolationism where we can't sit next to someone with a different political view. One of my greatest memories is sitting in between two political leaders in one state here in the United States. One Republican, very powerful and important senator, the other a former governor. One was a Republican, the other was Democrat, and they were adamantly opposed to each other politically, but they were always respectful of each other. They listened, they worked together on what they could agree, and in lodge meetings, they were the best friends, brothers, They were beloved of one another, as we should all be. But in their political lives, they worked together. They disagreed, but they never stooped to calling each other names or saying, oh, anything but that blankety blank member of whichever party. That's what Masonry is about. We avoid isolation. We don't want to get to that point where you cannot come to terms with another person and love one another as friends, as brothers. The next and possibly most telling failure, I guess, for Masonry to become a cult is we don't venerate a single leader. We don't have anyone who tells us how to think, how to believe, how to worship, how to vote, how to do anything else. If we were to think about the most charismatic leaders, let's think about Charlie Manson. Charlie Manson and his family were told exactly what they were to believe. They were told exactly. They had to believe Charlie Manson and everything he believed in, or they were ostracized. But before they were ostracized within the group, they were separated from their families, from their friends, from their communities. Absolutely the opposite of what we as Masons do. If we look at most notorious cult leaders in just modern America, Jim Jones, Charlie Manson, Bonnie Nettles, David Koresh, they're about absolute control over all aspects of their cult members' lives. They're about absolute control, and people had to almost worship them. And some of us in the church really feel most betrayed by ones like Jim Jones, because the People's Temple was supposed to be a religious organization. And that's where we still use the term drinking the Kool-Aid, because he put sodium cyanide in Kool-Aid and had his members administer that Kool-Aid to the babies and the little children and then drink it themselves, knowing that they were about to die. But he had them convinced that they had to die to go to heaven on the schedule that he told them was right and appropriate. Similar to Bonnie Nettles and Heaven's Gate. They had to go to heaven at that time because she told them that's what it was. In the field of psychology, we talk about this particular phenomenon of object relations. Cult leader has these three components of power. First, constant social pressure within the cult, within the organization. Second, reinforcement of a paranoid ideation. If people are telling you to be scared all the time, they're trying to put you into a cult state where you no longer question who you are, if what we do right. If you're not allowed to question, it's becoming a cult, whatever that group is. And third, what we call externally induced dissociative states. Dissociation means that you no longer really care. Let's say that you go out running, for example. That's, in psychology, one of my favorite examples. If you go out running, you may not really care that your legs hurt a little bit, that you're getting tired of this. After a while, you fall into a rhythm of running, if you've been running for a while. If you're fat and out of shape like I am, that's different. But if you start dissociating yourself from your body, you start attending to the goal of finishing the race, of running well. That's a good dissociation. The bad dissociation is when it's externally induced, where we're telling you, stop thinking about that family that you used to have. We're your family now. Stop thinking about the Constitution. We're your political leaders now. Stop thinking about whatever. This means that these three powers are going to weaken what we call your ego, your idea of self, your idea of who you are and what you stand for and what you love and what you hate and what you really believe in as being most important. The other aspect is that there are 4 kinds of cults: doomsday cults, political cults, religious cults, and sex cults. Now, doomsday cults, they're preparing for the end of the world. The Branch Davidians are a great example of this. Political cults, they want you to only believe in them and that no one else can be right and that everyone else is wrong and they're against you and they want to come and kill you and they want to take away or enslave you or whatever it is. That is a political cult. Religious cults tend to be the focus of a strange idea within a mainline religion, usually. Sometimes they're brand new religions. And the dogma, the theology is so focused on the one person's absolute interpretation, and if you question their interpretation, you are wrong, you are bad, and you're going to be punished. Not kicked out, because they need the members, but punished. They continue to isolate. And then things like Nexium, which was a cult in New York that was very much a sex cult, and you had to offer yourself in a sexual way to other members and to the leaders, and if you didn't, again, you were ostracized within and punished, but you had been already separated from your family, from your friends, in the meaningful ways of life. Let's look at this from a different theory. A lot of people like this article from The Atlantic that defined cults in a slightly different way, but I like to bring it up. First, opposing critical thinking. Find groups of Nobel laureates. You're going to find a large number in any grouping who are Freemasons. Critical thinking is what we're about. As I mentioned before, the Royal Society, that is one of the world's most famous group of critical thinkers. Think about great philosophers. Voltaire, writer, philosopher, great Freemason. We do not isolate members from their families, from their communities. We engage them more. We don't penalize someone for leaving. We might say, hey, we miss you, brother, hope you're doing all right. But we don't try and go out of our way to destroy your life if you leave. We don't even destroy the lives of those who leave and say bad things about us. Imagine that, actually still loving people even after they've done bad things to us. What's the world coming to? The idea of emphasizing a special doctrine outside of Scripture. There are aspects of Freemasonry where people want to engage in esoterics, but they're not told what to believe. They take it upon themselves to look farther. A lot of us discuss ideas of Kabbalah, for example. If you're not sure what Kabbalah is, it's well worth looking up. It's a way of interpreting, especially Old Testament scripture, but that came from the Hebrew faith. We don't ever seek inappropriate loyalty to a leader, to an individual. We ask for an idea of loyalty to the beliefs, to the tenets of being upright, moral, judgment-free. The idea of equality, liberty, fraternity should sound familiar to you. It was a Freemasonic term that was then used as the motto of the Republic of France. Freemasonry embraces the family unit. You should always put your family and your faith above anything else. And when you become a Mason, you are told, Masonry is a wonderful thing, but it can sometimes take up too much of your time. Your family, your faith, and your job must always come before your Masonry, period. That's the exact opposite of what a cult does. We never dishonor, we honor. There are times where I've actually had my shoulder tapped by someone saying, you're doing an awful lot. Is your wife okay with, you're spending this much time? Oh no, I really need to double check and make sure that I'm not away. To ask my children, Do you mind that I'm away for this other meeting or this, day on a Saturday morning, for example? You work together with the family so that they are honored. The other idea is cults have is crossing biblical lines. Your personal view of faith. The Atlantic article used biblical, but it should be any of your faith systems. If the lines are crossed telling you that your morals, your idea of purity, for example, of your personhood, if those are being compromised by the group, then it is a cult. If they are being embraced and increased, it's probably not a cult. And again, as I've said before, separation from the church. As a theologian, as a psychologist, and as a Mason, I will tell you, I and every Mason I know wants you more engaged in your house of worship, whatever it is. I have been in lodges where I have been the only Christian sitting in that lodge, and I loved it, and I felt absolutely embraced and valued for my Christianity. I have been in lodges where it was mixed with Jews and Christians of both Protestant, Orthodox, Catholic. There were Mormons, there were all kinds of other, in the overall grouping of Christianities in there, along with Muslims and Sikhs and Jains in one room, all loving one another. Yes, we have our differences, but we also talked through those differences and learned from one another to strengthen one another's faith in their own system. Separating you from your religious organization is very much a cult thing, very much not what Freemasonry is about. I do want to bring up one person who we are sometimes accused of venerating too much, and that's George Washington. George Washington was a very important Freemason, and there was, in fact, a group of Freemasons that offered to continue the Revolutionary War such that he would become king because they loved him. They thought he was the best leader. And he said, "Why are we fighting this? I don't want to just replace the king by being a new king." I'm paraphrasing, obviously. The idea of George Washington being a supreme leader only as a military person. He was even offered, we'll put together a grand lodge of these United States, and he didn't want that much power. He didn't think anyone should have that much power and authority. He had been president, he had been, well, actually he was only a 2-star general, but that was the most you could get. Today, if you're a 5-star general, you still assume that he has a 6-star because no one can be above George Washington in military parlance. But there were a group of Masons that paid for a beautiful fresco to be painted in the rotunda of the Capitol of the United States. So in the Capitol building, if you look right up, you'll see this beautiful painting. 1865, the end of the Civil War, it was painted by Constantino Brumidi, and it was called the Apotheosis of Washington. Take a quick look at it. If we look at this beautiful picture of the Apotheosis of Washington, apotheosis, by the way, means elevating to almost godlike status, which can be a very offensive term to an awful lot of people. Godlike status? Well, it means that you revere him, you respect him, and it's an old term that's quite often misunderstood. In this painting, George Washington sits in judgment over the people in the rotunda. Are you doing what we fought and so many died to do, enshrining liberty of other individuals? And if other individuals have to live your way or no way, it's a cult, or at least authoritarianism. It's not liberty. It's not what the United States Constitution is about. So that's the closest thing. But we in Freemasonry venerate him as a great leader. We don't worship by any means. We don't hold him up as being perfect. He was not a perfect person. He was a great leader, especially at certain moments when he made decisions that impacted the world. He made good decisions. They put others' rights above his own at times. And for that, we did build the Washington Masonic Memorial in Alexandria, Virginia, and it is a beautiful place. And sometimes people worry because there is a very large statue of George Washington in that building. It's not there to worship. It is there to remember. The man could have had all the power, but he had the humility and the belief in God, even though because he was a Mason, he was accused of being a deist. If you allow other people to have their faith, that does not mean you don't have your own. I would encourage you, if you still have questions about cults in Masonry, just start looking through lists of famous Freemasons. See how many have been the ultimate defenders of liberty. If you are in the United States, you might want to look at how many of our generals, whether it was Truman, Eisenhower, MacArthur, Bradley, so many others who were adamant Freemasons because it helped them remember ethics. It helped them remember what we are fighting for. I've put a little list of some suggested readings here for you, just in case you really want to go through. And I tried to bring it from a multiplicity of perspectives, a whole bunch of different ways of looking at it, so that you consider from science and social work to the issues like The Atlantic and other popular press that I have quoted in here. Try and think through who we are as Freemasons, and the more that you recognize who we are, the less the possibility of us ever being accused of being a cult could have any validity whatsoever. My prayers for you. I hope that this has been helpful. Bye.